And I'd like to introduce our Smart Water panel that'll be moderated by Eleanor Allen. Eleanor is a compassionate truth teller and an advocate of empowered equality for people across the globe. She's a world-leading water expert dedicated to helping billions of people access safe and sustainable water. Eleanor has dedicated her career to this goal, first as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic, and then consulting, where she served as the Latin America's water lead for CH2M Hill, and then as the global director for water at Arcadis. She's been serving as the CEO for the highly acclaimed global nonprofit Water for People for the last 3+ years. We are extremely fortunate that Eleanor is a board member at Parametrics, and I'm proud to introduce her today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I'm excited to bring water into this discussion here. And I loved Grace's introduction to leadership, so we're going to try to bring it together with the two panels this morning on transportation mobility now to water. So I have an amazing panel here that I will bring up on the stage. So all different sections of water and all experts in their fields as well. And we've crisscrossed over the years in different ways. So first, Sudhir, I want to introduce, he's the CEO of New Hub. I feel like I'm bringing people on the stage here or something. Sudhir Murthy is, he's an expert in water and wastewater treatment, and we know each other back from the wastewater world. And right now he runs New Hub. That is yeah, you guys come on up, so this is a little less awkward.
It's a little less Academy Awards.
Yeah, a little less Academy Awards. So actually, which microphone is on right now? Doesn't matter. I'm in front of both. Okay.
In the right position, so I'm not sure.
So Sudhir is into innovation and treatment, and he's also an adjunct professor at Columbia. He was formerly the chief innovation officer at DC Water, so he can bring about the utility perspective. Deborah is a partner with XPV Water Partners, and they're the largest growth-focused water equity firm, so really helping growth companies in water in the U.S., and she's well known on Wall Street for her research and in equity and an analyst. And so she's working with companies in financing innovation in the water space. Rebecca works for IBM, so she's coming at it from the angle of helping across the globe in the areas of business transformation in energy, environment, and utilities. So her portfolio of clients really looking at efficiency, optimization, data, and analytics. And Will is the CEO of Water Foundry, and he is an expert in sustainability and strategy. So Will works with global multinationals, nonprofits, and he's also works with water tech startups. And he's also a prolific author. So you can find books by Will about stewardship, water equity. Let's see, I'm thinking of the other books I know about. He's done a Water, Energy, Food Nexus is there, and also on the circular economy. So you can look up those books by Will. So we're going to have some different questions that we've put together to play off each other's skills. But first, I just want to bring you into the water space in the Northwest. Most of you are from here, not all. We're from different places. But if you think globally in water, there's a lot of things happening in the environment, in our climate, whether it's just like, wow, it rains a little bit more, a little bit less in the Northwest, or maybe there's really is climate change, or maybe it's a climate emergency. Depending where you come from, things are changing in water. So we know, and those of you who live here know even better, there's a lot of the water source and supply here is from glaciers. So about 850 glaciers in the Pacific Northwest area. As the glaciers continue to melt and the winters become warmer, stream flows are changing. And one of the big effects that's coming into play and will be more and more urgent is that the summer stream flows will become a lot less. So more population, lower stream flows, there's big changes happening. And then if you look at in the coastal and the tidal, the king tides, the super, super high tides are increasing as well. So where there used to be a dozen or so, these will increase over the next years to several dozen. And then the sea level rises, it's estimated about 6 inches over the next 50 years. So that impacts not only homeowners, but also coastal infrastructure. So if we think about in wastewater, for example, the corrosion can work upstream into the wastewater plants and other infrastructure. So that's an issue. And in Washington State, I don't know the Northwest, but I know Washington State has about 40 billion needs in water infrastructure. So if you look at that between water, wastewater, that's about a third, and then about 2/3 is stormwater. So a lot of need there as well. And then going into the treatment itself, I worked previously in my life a lot for King County, so I know the treatment plants around here. But we like to, in the wastewater field, like to talk about resource recovery facilities. So not only are these facilities, they're providing services, they're providing water protection, they're servicing the wastewater, they're generating energy, and they're manufacturing things. They're manufacturing water, manufacturing fertilizer, and manufacturing other products like bioplastics. So this is also the way we're looking at treatment for the future. And then, of course, for those who may know this, I do, it's my favorite day of the year. It's World Toilet Day today. So we have to celebrate that. This is actually a big event in the global world of sanitation is what we call it when we don't have wastewater, which is where I work now. It's just non-sewered sanitation, so World Toilet Day. You'll never forget November 19th. And then lastly, coming to our topic of today of technology and smart water, there's a lot of things happening that you'll hear about from the panel on advanced metering, on sensors, understanding more about supply and demand of services, knowing about water losses, whether there be physical leaks or commercial losses and billing or theft, and then working to the data side, to the analytics, to the optimization for more preventive maintenance, just really getting more efficient way to steward and use our resources. So with that, I'd love my panelists to come and give their own introduction to the work they do. We have a no-slide panel, and we have very great speakers. And then we also developed some instant polling for you, so we'll use that in Slido as well, and then we can go into the traditional Q&A that we've been doing already. So first up, Sudhir.
All right. I really had a very enjoyable morning, and Grace's presentation was terrific. It's, I was mentioning to some folks, you would not hear a presentation like Grace did on the East Coast. I come from the East Coast, so I'm probably the only one. I feel alone here, but it's a remarkable opportunity to listen to this, and truly, I'd be hard pressed to hear something like that on that side. I wanted to actually, I've worked 20 years at DC Water, and this was through the 90s and the last decade. And DC Water went really from being a pariah of water utilities, probably one of the worst in the U.S., to become a prima donna. We are right now considered prima donnas. So and so how did we go from that? And people ask me that question because I was leading much of the innovation during those 20 years, and I think of Grace talking about creativity and risk. It almost seemed like the more processes we created, the less creative we got, and really for utilities, especially public utilities, how do you balance processes that we create for ourselves to manage what we want to do, and then how to actually create that right environment. And so during those 20 years, I probably was at fault of creating more processes and becoming less creative. So I reflect upon that from your very excellent presentation. The second hat I wear is I'm the Senior Vice President of the International Water Association. And to give you a sense, about 800 million to about 1 billion, maybe closer to 800 million, have access to clean water and wastewater treatment. And I believe in this next decade, within this next decade, about 4 billion more will have, right? So we are going from I would say, more than 2 centuries of water and wastewater type treatment and approaches, where 1 billion have services. And within the next 10 years, 10, 15 years, it's going to be 3 more billion. So it's like, it's a pilot study. The past 100 years is a pilot study for what's going to happen in the next decade. I go to countries like in India and China, a water or wastewater treatment facility is being built every day, one in a city, at a rate of 1 a day, right? And in the United States, we build maybe 1 a year. So this massive change is occurring, and obviously we need to leapfrog, and we will leapfrog because to achieve what we have to achieve, we will leapfrog. And so, what are those opportunities, and how do we actually bring our skill sets, our collective skill sets from the United States? Because believe it or not, we are in the U.S. the most diverse. We are the most diverse of anywhere in the world. We appreciate, we think we don't appreciate diversity, but I think we appreciate diversity more than anywhere else in the world. So how do we actually make that happen for the 3 billion that will have access? And in my new role, I'm also a CEO of a company called New Hub. And what we've been trying to do is very similar to a conversation that was had about transportation, where when you build a railway station or when you build a metro stop, you actually create wealth. You bring prosperity because asset values go up. But that's the same for water. When you clean up something or when you protect something, you actually bring prosperity. And we in the public sector always try to rely on ratepayers and our ticket base, quote unquote, to pay for much of what we do. While 20 years down the road, if we clean up something, we bring prosperity. And why don't we actually work and create some new business models? And so we've been trying to develop financial models of linking water to wealth, and then helping with funding those water projects. So those are some of what I've been doing, and we can talk more.
Thanks, Sudhir.
Yeah.
And Deborah, can you tell us about the world of finance?
Yes, I appreciate the diversity and inclusion that you're showing here in terms of bringing somebody from Wall Street, from the capital markets. I think I'm probably the only one, so that's great, because I'm biased, of course, but I think it does come down to money at the end of the day, often. And that is my background. I was, as Eleanor said, I was an equity research analyst following it's a pretty small sector, really, from a Wall Street standpoint. Water is such a huge industry. How many of you here work in water? Lots. That's great. It's a big industry. It's a critical industry, but from a financial market standpoint, it's pretty small because, of course, most of it's public. But I feel that there's so much opportunity, and part of it is financing it correctly. I'm loving, I think it was Jeff that said earlier that here in this industry, we're problem solvers, and that's what you do every day. And I feel like in water, the problem's just gotten bigger and broader, that when I started out looking at water more years ago than I care to admit, it was, and Sudhir will remember this certainly too, it was very siloed. The water people, we talked about, I think it was, who was it Grace that said it was, if the planners talk to the engineers, that's diversity. And it was the same thing in water. If the water people talk to the wastewater people, that was diversity.
Absolutely.
And who are those stormwater people? So there's the bringing it together to solve problems at a watershed scale across the entire value chain is really what the future of the water industry is about. And I think that what that also means is it's a bit of a different mindset. And I'm not an engineer, but I've obviously spent most of my career interacting with engineers. And I feel, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in the engineering community, we like to design and build big things, big, dramatic things. One of the things about water, of course, is that a lot of it is underground. But I feel that the water industry of the future really needs to be about building things, more efficiently and in a smaller footprint, and in a way that is getting more out of the resources that are available. And that's hard. You know, I think it does require the leapfrogging that Sudhir talked about. One of the things that we look at is decentralized treatment. You know, we invest in a lot of companies that do modular decentralized systems because so much of the investment that needs to be made is on huge pipes, huge water pipes, huge sewer pipes, huge stormwater containment basins. You know, how can we get around some of that mega infrastructure that we've historically accomplished in this country through great American ingenuity and do it more efficiently? Obviously, the big change, Rebecca will talk more about this, and I think Will as well. The huge change since I've started in water has, of course, been the entrance of the digital age. That, as we heard about the evolution to 5G earlier this morning, I have to say that digital has been slow to come to the utility sector overall, and certainly to the water sector, but it's starting to happen. And it is requiring just a whole different thought process. You know, this evolution from building things and building hardware, as I heard someone present recently, you know, hardware is not software. Software is created by how you think about things and how you be creative, and then how you create and adjust, you know, the software to accomplish that. And it's about how you use these tools to create solutions. As I also heard someone say at a presentation recently, that we being the vendors and then also the clients, you know, thinking differently. It's not about which pump should I buy, but how do I solve for flooding? You know, how do I solve for the issue, not just, okay, we're going to put out a requisition for dewatering pumps. It's thinking about it differently, and I think it's hard. I think it's challenging. And as we've seen this evolution, I've certainly talked to a few IT people inside of utilities that are pretty frustrated guys or girls, because they're trying to bring change into organizations that aren't really used to thinking that way. But I think the opportunity for us when we do that is huge. It's certainly what we're looking to do. I am now primarily involved with a fund, as Eleanor said, that focuses on investing in technologies and services. That's hard work too, but we're looking for the places, you know, to put money that can make a difference, that can develop things over time. And I'll just close with, you know, I was thinking about this morning, listening to it. I loved listening to the presentations this morning, and I do think this is something that we all need to do more of. Those of us who do go to a lot of conferences and talk in our own little worlds. I can't remember how many water conferences I go to every year, but I do think that I'm going to start making the water conferences bring in transportation people and bring in power people and bring in city people, because that's really where all these things interconnect, is where change, I think, is going to happen. And the comment from Mary Barra talking about the future of the automotive industry, that's no crashes or zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero, the third one was congestion, which was going to be the hardest one. You know, I think that we have opportunities in water as well. You know, what if we can have, you know, zero flood intrusion because we're using IoT to manage our sewer systems to create, you know, less expensive storage inside the existing sewer networks. You know, what if we can have zero health effects because we have sensors at the tap that tell you if you have lead or other contaminants in your water? I think that some of those, you know, what if we have, you know, zero shortages because, you know, we really have figured out the reuse paradigms. I think the opportunity is huge. You know, this industry will be at the forefront of it, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Deborah. We were speaking at lunch about how nice it was that we were in this cross-sector room. So thank you, Jeff, for organizing this, but also to open our minds to what others are doing, and so we do get out of our bubble a little bit. Will, what do you think? And I know Will's going to also bring in another, I'm leading the witness here. But
Tell me what I should say.
So you should say something about the multinationals. We haven't talked about that today.
Okay.
So go for it.
Sure. So I just want to make a point about conference fatigue. This is refreshing because I learned something about innovation from the transportation sector.
Me too.
And that's really what we need. So kudos to the the company and everyone else that was here. A little bit about my background, so you know kind of from where I came and hopefully my perspective. So I started my career as a hydrogeologist a very long time ago in a land far away, New York, working for a company called Garrity and Miller. How many people remember Garrity and Miller? Thank you. When I would measure water levels with a steel tape and chalk. So it was incredibly primitive. But anyway, so I did that, super fun programs, water supply projects, a lot of litigation support work. Got hooked on this notion of sustainability about 20 years ago and felt like the world really needed a sustainability strategy consulting firm. So I started one. And it was really before anyone was willing to pay for those services, so I had a P&L that was kind of brutal to look at, but I was determined. And stayed through that, sold it to Deloitte Consulting, led their water strategy practice, and that's when I really got hooked on corporate water strategy in a very big way. So what I do, I'm no longer with Deloitte, I have my own firm. So what I do now is work with U.S., non-U.S. multinationals on corporate water strategy, and what that means is helping them quantify business value at risk and developing strategies to mitigate those risks, which include physical risk, you know, do you have enough water, when and where you need it of the right quality, regulatory risk, what are the regulations right now, what might they look like, and probably the biggest risk of all is reputational risk. So anyone with a Twitter account can shut you down. Which is significant. Do a little bit of work with NGOs and foundations, which I really enjoy, and then about half the work I do is with water technology startups and early growth stage companies, and have even dabbled in investment in those companies, which sharpens the mind even more when you start writing your own check and getting involved as, you know, more than an advisor. So that's what I do now. I'll give you my thoughts in terms of what I'm seeing in the marketplace. I'm impatient by nature, so in the world of corporate water strategy or corporate water stewardship, I believe it's stalled, and that's a problem. So companies have moved from water management, which is looking at how they manage water within their four walls, to water stewardship, which is a risk-driven strategy. And gets those companies to look at risk across their value chain, so supply chain operations and product use, engagement with consumers. And that's really incomplete if it's risk. So what risk does is drive engagement, but it doesn't drive investment. So one of the things I really push on is getting companies to think about the business value of water and how they can solve water, to borrow the Xylem tagline a bit, and do more beyond just looking at their water footprint. So that's what I push them on. I push them to invest in innovation, technology, funding, financing, partnerships, consider brand value and water strategy to make investments. When I think about technology, and I'm glad you brought up decentralized, what I focus on is mostly digital, because it will transform, and it is transforming not just the water sector, but our relationship with water. So it's, for me, it's digital, decentralized, and democratized. And I think the interesting part about digital is less about the technology, because it's going to happen. Analog is no longer an option, really. I tend to focus on the strategy, the workforce issues, the human challenges between, you know, knowing that you need a digital strategy and actually doing the digital strategy. That's a big gap with companies, and the utility sector and the public sector. And then decentralized, obviously decentralized treatment technologies, but also think about air moisture capture, whether it's off-grid or on-grid, and the ability to deliver water supply in a 21st century way. And democratized, to me, is incredibly exciting, because there's this movement in terms of new technologies, new business models that deliver hydration in a very different way. You know, whether it's in a water kiosk, outdoors, whether it's in your home, where you can get still sparkling, flavored, fortified, whatever it may be. There's a lot of movement in that area right now that I think is really exciting. So those 3 Ds are what I focus on, mostly on the first D, digital, because I believe it's the biggest lever we can pull in getting water right. And then the last thing, innovation. I think we have innovation wrong, not completely wrong, but I think we have it backwards. There's no shortage of water technology hubs, accelerators, prize competitions, programs, fill in the blank, and it's sort of a hammer looking for a nail. Not really knowing what the use case is, not knowing how do you create revenue, how do you drive customer engagement, build a customer base. So what I really like is sort of the other way around, which is people that have a problem to solve going out in the marketplace, not exclusively to water professionals, but other folks that know nothing about water, that can look at our problems and say, oh, have you ever thought of fill in the blank? We should try this. So there's a program in Denver called 10-10-10, which is 10 wicked problems, 10 entrepreneurs for 10 days. Those 10 entrepreneurs are selected, and they know nothing about the topic. So when they ran their water program, those people came from every other sector but water, and they spun out some really interesting companies to date. And then also what I'm seeing in the world of innovation is that there are unusual partnerships. Am I over my 5 minutes?
Yeah.
No. I was cautioned, don't ramble. And
Starting to
I'm
get
rambling, so I'll put a lid on it in a minute. So AB InBev has a venture fund, ZX Ventures, and they, in quotes, partner with that as a way to identify startup technologies that meet their needs, but also environmental, social, economic needs around issues of sustainability, climate change, and so on. TNC has a partnership with Techstars, and they just finished their second cohort, and it was really cool. There were 5 water companies out of 10, and that's exciting to me, bringing people in that know nothing about our world. So, thank you.
Obviously, you're not excited at all about what you do.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think water people are passionate, just like transportation people. So just to be
Being
clear.
inclusive here.
I'm getting it, right?
Okay, Rebecca, so bring us into your world.
Sure, great, thank you. And also, water people are optimistic. So I'm going to try to build on Will's 3Ds, as well as incorporate the leapfrogging that Sudhir mentioned, because I think it's really important how we learn from other industries that may have gone before us. And then also the collaboration that Deborah mentioned, because I believe that in the future, it's how we all work together across transportation, water, energy, and government that is going to help us deliver on tackling the world's greatest challenges and opportunities at hand. And so, as Eleanor mentioned, I work with IBM. I have responsibility for our energy, environment, and utilities, business transformation. And we're really working to leverage AI and machine learning to unlock the value in data and use that to drive transformation across our industries. And so often, I'm asked to come and talk about the topic of digitalization. And Will knows that at a recent conference, I actually put digitalization in timeout because I was so exhausted about the topic and the term. But I think it's an important term, but I also think it's one of 5 factors that are really driving the transformation of, in the future of our profession. Really, and so I'll start with decarbonization because I think it's an important one. I haven't heard it mentioned so much today, maybe a little bit earlier in the day, but if everyone's familiar with the fact that the energy sector is responsible for about 1/3 of the carbon emissions, and I was surprised though to learn that last year 2/3 of the growth was attributed to the energy sector. And our investments in AI and machine learning aren't helping, and water's a big part of that percentage. And this is all against this backdrop of, I think now it's 77 countries and over 100 cities who have committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. including California. And another fact that I was shocked to learn was that our California wildfires in 2018 generated 9 times more carbon emissions than we saved in 2017. And so we're up against a very, very huge challenge to meet that goal. The next one I'll borrow from Will would be decentralization for me. And again, really looking at the trends from the industry and leapfrogging, we look at the energy sector where I think it's now 200 gigawatts of distributed generation will be installed globally by 2025. And another trend that we're seeing in the energy space is that more and more assets are coming online that are not utility owned. But in order to deliver on the service that the utility must provide, these assets must be secured, they must be operationalized, and they must be reliable. And so that's a major change from what we've been used to in the past. I'll move to democratization. Here, I'll talk about the European Union, because in the European Union, 1/5 of the energy industry, their generation is going to come from behind the meter by 2030. And the involvement and interest of prosumers is at an all-time high. And I was continually reminded of this. I was preparing for another conference, and my 13-year-old daughter was watching me prepare, and she didn't say anything, but the next morning as I was walking out the door, she stopped me and she said, "Mom," she said, "you know, as you prepare to lead this workshop around the future of water, could you please tell them not to leave too big of a mess for me to clean up? Because I'm planning on having a family, and water and power are kind of important." So it brings up to me this underrepresented, well, non-voting, it's 5 more years yet before she'll have the right to vote. But the decisions that we're making today are going to impact her future. And so it's another huge responsibility, I think, for us. Let's see where I'm at. I think digitalization obviously is a major factor. The percentage that I'll share is 75% of assets will be digitally connected by 2023. So that's coming up here in the next couple of years. And then the last D that I'll share is really data, because this conversation, it's really being fueled by IoT and the vast amounts of data that the connectedness of things is generating. And to tie it back to the transportation industry, when we opened our Watson IoT headquarters in Munich, Germany in 2017, 2018, so at the turn of the year, we partnered with BMW to deploy 4 connected vehicles to transport visitors to and from our center. And we began to study the data that was being generated. And I was surprised to learn that a connected car can generate 25 gigabytes of data per hour. Well, that data, if you take the amount of data that was generated by the BMWs from just the Munich airport to our center, and you print it and bound it, it'd be enough to fill a small library from floor to ceiling with hard-covered books, which was shocking. And then another shocking statistic is that connected car software contains over 100 million lines of code, and that's compared to the 6.5 million lines of code it takes to operate the avionics and support system for a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Take it a step further, that a connected vehicle communicates with 5 primary domains: vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to network, vehicle to pedestrian, and vehicle to everything. You take data, this data that's being generated, you combine it with the other 4 factors, and you begin to see the challenge, or depending on how you look at it, the opportunity of our time.
Whoa, okay, awesome.
Did I wrap it up?
My brain's like, I can't keep up with the backup. We're going to go into our questions here, and I don't think I have to tell my panel this, but you guys can, of course, build on each other's answers, because I'm sure you'll get all excited. First, I would just mention, you mentioned your daughter was saying, don't mess up, I want to have kids too. My son came home last week from freshman year of college. He said, well, I just want you to know, my friends and I, none of us are going to have any kids, because this is such a mess. First of all, there'll be no resources. Second of all, we don't want to bring kids into the world. And I was with his grandma and 3 aunts, and we all sat there like this, like, oh. So we'll see if that changes or not, but it did make an impact on our lunch, that's for sure, last week. So Sudhir, I want to come back to you with thinking about all these things we've introduce here topics. I know that you have some way you talk about technology related to animals, like some big animals, some small animals. Maybe you could tell us how that works and how that animals can align to innovations.
So people talk about the water sector, and they always talk about water utilities as being slow to innovate. And but when you go into a water utility, you see a lot of things happening, and there's this concept called a clarifier, and there's a squircle where you combine a square clarifier and a circular clarifier, and so there's lots of things happening do you know the squircles?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So
You just crossed the line, Sudhir, in terms of geek.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
So, but the point I was making was, so what's this? Why are we slow to innovate and yet we do innovate? So I decided that I had to divide the water sector innovation into three animals. I called it the elephant, the horse, and the hare. The elephant was these really almost like platform-like technologies where the shape of the Boeing doesn't change. The shape of certain things do not change too much. And so those were the elephants that lasted 80 years, slow gestation periods, 15 years, 20 years of gestation, and then 80 years of technology. A lot of the pipes on the ground are elephants. And then there were the horses, the machines, and those gestation periods were maybe 5 years, but the life of 20 years. And so how do you actually manage the horses and the elephants all in that water utility? And really a lot of technology of the Industrial Revolution were horses. And the patent laws, by the way, I believe, I don't think it was intended, were really intended for horses. 20 years of patent law, but really it was the world of the horses. And then of course the new world of the hares. I almost call them fruit flies. Forget hares, where you'd see all of these smart water technologies and these gizmos that a water utility would see, and how do you choose these hairs? And by the time a water utility chose that hair, it's already obsolete. And so, is it obsolete? Is there another hair that I need to pick? Because those things were changing so fast. And so, when you're in the water sector, you almost need to kind of work with all of these three. You need to be an elephant herder. Certainly have to be that. But you need to also know how to catch your hares. And how do you procure those hares? Because we in the water sector, we used to procure hares like we would procure elephants. And do we actually need different approaches to do all of these different things? And how do we actually go about doing it in a reasonable way?
Thank you for that. So in light of thinking of the hares and the fruit flies, particularly for this next question, so I think for Will, you might be working with more of the fruit flies with these these small startups, tech innovations, and maybe Deborah more of the hares, or maybe a horse, I'm not sure. But how
We have some hares and some
you have
horses.
some horse, so maybe you can comment on your hares
I
and
don't know
horses.
if we have fruit flies. Will or
Will.
Deb?
So, yeah, I guess they're fruit flies. They're not all fruit flies, but I really love the fruit flies. And I like them because they are typically led by a committed, passionate founder that wants to change the world, in particular in the world of water. I think people have a big social mission. And they have technology, they have an idea. God knows they don't have a business plan. They don't have a team. They maybe have never talked to a customer or two. So there's, a lot of challenges that they have. And, I get excited about connecting them to customers, putting them in front of, one of my clients who will give them an unvarnished opinion whether this is a real use case or it's an imagined idea in terms of whether they can generate revenue or not. And I think we need to obviously foster those fruit flies and get them to either scale or die quickly because again, hubs, accelerators are interesting, fun, and we can feel good about it, but I think we're spending a lot of time trying to promote things that really should not go any further, and maybe just pluck the CEO that's really smart, knows how to lead a team, and has a vision, and put them in another entity, even if it's maybe a hair-sized company or whatever it may be. So I think it's a really interesting space. It's really an important space, but I do think it's challenged under the current model.
Can you give some examples of the fruit flies that do live a few more days, or?
Yeah,
become
so,
heirs?
talk a little bit about the TNC Techstar cohort. I was one of several mentors for these teams. There's a company called Jibe, a bunch of guys, not very diverse, 3 of them, that came out of the IT sector, and they have intellectual property related or about collecting satellite data and coupling it with on-the-ground images to provide real-time water quality data. Now, that is really impressive. Put them in front of a couple of clients, a large beer company and a large mining company, and they loved it. And they come up with more than one use case. So I'm really bullish on Jibe. I think they're smart. I think they're going to raise money, and they have clients that are really interested in them. And then Aquaoso, company out of California. They've been around for a while. They do water risk work for the ag sector. They're not quite a fruit fly, maybe a fly. And their experience, so I get excited about them. And then there were a few others that I think are really interesting. The 10-10-10 program that you were involved with, Ari and Spout, I think is, but really exciting. So it's real-time lead testing at the tap, which gets back to the democratization issue. So imagine if people in Flint actually knew that they were drinking lead in water instead of waiting for regulatory agency or the utility to finally come around and say, oh yeah, you're right. So, there are a number of really interesting companies out there. I get really excited about the digital data startups, because I think they have an opportunity to be like an Uber, like a Lyft, and really change how we relate to water by going around public policy.
There's
Deborah?
a sad truth, though, that Silicon Valley has done very little in water. The venture capital community doesn't really get water. They kind of think it's public and it can't grow, and we can't have an Uber in water. It's a really interesting challenge, I think, for the sector. And how we support these technologies, and I think all of you who work with technologies are part of the solution to that, working with your clients. But one story, as an example, one of the companies that we've invested in fairly recently is a company called Aquatic Informatics that does big sets of water data. But they're out of Vancouver, so they're just up the road from here. But they survived in their early years by basically government funding. They are now the provider of real-time, and this is a big deal, and we haven't really figured out how to monetize it yet, but they're the provider of now USGS data in real time. For those of you who've worked in that sector, you remember when we used to get that USGS water report once every 10 years, and the data was already 5 years old at that point. Now all the data that comes off those hydrological monitors is real time, and Aquatic Informatics is the one that has that technology. But they basically stayed alive through USGS funding for them to develop it. It was about a 5-year process. And they've done similar things for Water Canada, and now they're looking to figure out, how to, and it's an investment of ours as we look at, how do they take that ability to take huge sets of water data and clean it up and analyze it and make it useful? How do we then create an investment case around that? Because one of the really hard things, I think, in water is that investors can't figure it out. They find it to be very challenging unless they're investing in traditional water utilities.
No, I have a thought on that. It's really excellent point. What's quote unquote the Uber or Airbnb of water, right? And I think about the United States, where much of the water utilities are public. They are not private. Most of our water utilities are public, and we are proudly so. And then I look at some of the other countries, like the United Kingdom, where the Walmartization, I call it, Walmartization of water utilities occurred, the Thames Waters, and then in France, the Veolias and the Suezes. So we had this massive Walmartization. And if you look at, we had the corner grocer, which is our water utility, and the Walmartization, and the next is perhaps the Amazonification of water. But that's not going to happen, because water utilities are public, and Amazon and Uber are not truly decentralized. They are distributed because they have a central power. Somebody is managing it, and there are these distributed vehicles. And so we are water utilities. We are kind of decentralized in the US. And so there's obviously that opportunity of quote unquote the Uber, but it does not happen because we are public. Is there, and that's the question that I have, is there the next step after Uber, which is the blockchain and the distributed ledger, where we are truly decentralized and truly decentralized rather than being distributed? And how do we prepare for that next step? And maybe we haven't gotten there yet in the water sector, where that next step needs to happen. And how do we actually, because the water sector, the public utilities are transparent. We don't have issues of privacy as much. So where is that next step, and how do we get there?
There's a quote by a science fiction writer, William Gibson, and you know the quote. It's basically the future is here. So this is not a linear process, in my view. This is messy, and we're seeing that next step, if you will, or next series of steps show up by democratizing data and actionable information to consumers and customers that are starting to make different choices about their water, whether it's in-home filtrate, smart taps, under-the-sink systems, alternative hydration systems like SodaStream and other technologies. So I really don't think it's going to be, well, this is what we did, 200 years ago. This is what we did last century. This is the next thing. I think there are really interesting data points out there that will probably be some blend of centralized utilities and distributed, localized, whatever it may be. So I think it's a really interesting time in terms of what's happening on the technology side.
I'm curious, Rebecca, if with that in mind, if you think about a traditional US water utility that's a regional system, how much can that be optimized through artificial intelligence, machine learning, adding sensors all over the place, making it a smart system? Or is it just there's only so much you can do, and then it needs to be broken up and becomes decentralized to be more efficient?
Sure. So I think, just to really, I'll broaden the conversation, then I'll bring it back in. I think we're really at an inflection point across all industries right now, because we're moving from a world that's driven by humans and supported by technology to a world that will be driven by technology but supported by humans. And we've done a lot of experimentation. We've got a lot of innovation in fruit flies out there, and we've glimpsed the benefits, right? And we can see how we can deliver value, but we've yet to be able to slipstream that into our way of working. And we know that we're going to need to change the way in which we work in order to achieve that. And I think that one immediate step along the way is really going to be about how we change how we look at things. Because if you take, what Deborah was talking about with the service that's available, as an industry, we're used to big projects, and it goes back to, we complete a project. Everything is project-based. All of our revenue recovery is based on that project. It's not as a service. Absolutely. So we're going to have to be really thoughtful, right, about how we start to take advantage of that. And maybe, when we get to maybe the conversation about whether or not we need to centralize or decentralize comes down the road. But first, the very first step is to really rethink the rules that we've put in place and the way that in which we're positioning our sector to be able to take advantage of these new innovations and bring them in and reap the benefits and the value, of them, and maybe whether or not we're centralized or decentralized is, maybe just one way of potentially dealing with the problem, but maybe the first step is to redefine in this new world and with these new rules how we're going to play the game.
Do we buy or do we rent?
Right. I mean,
We haven't even decided that yet.
I've started thinking about the enterprise software business, which is a big departure for any water person. But when we think about how that business evolved into software as a service, that it really is about, optimizing the processes, making it more efficient, accomplishing the goal, not about selling something and putting it on your premises. I think that you're exactly right, Rebecca, that's where if we can think about providing the service, someone said it earlier, that we tend to, reverse engineer into things that we want to do, why we should build this big tunnel. But if we think about, really what you're getting to at the end of the day, is there a service that can, be doing, much smaller management of flows? Now that we have the sensors, now that we have the data, can we manage flows on a much more distributed level and provide that as a service to the community more efficiently? I don't know. I think there's an awful lot we have yet to do on that.
Can I ask a question? So, Deborah, who are you seeing in the world of water that has not just a SaaS model, but a successful water as a service model out there that you could?
I think we're just at the very early stages of it. The data company I mentioned earlier, Aquatic Informatics, they're starting in that direction, but it's not really water as a service, it's data as a service. I think that the only thing we've had, really, the water utilities are providing water as a service, but none of the product companies have yet started thinking about that model.
So, Banyan Water, would you put them in that category? Sort of, it's more performance contracting.
Right, around the
but-
the IoT space,
Yeah.
right? Anything around IoT or anybody that, I mean, even when you think of, I was recently at a Danaher conference, and Danaher, makes instruments, and they work with companies that make big pumps. How do you provide the quality of water or product that the customer wants, not just sell them stuff?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
I have one last question for any or all of you before we go into our instant polling for the audience. What law, policy, or regulation would you change today, if you could, to accelerate the rate of change in the water space?
My thoughts, at least on, is how we regulate water. I go to the developing world a lot, and I reflect upon how we regulate water in the United States and as well as in Europe. I think regulation has done a lot of good, but regulators de-risk water. And what I mean by that is, let's take, for example, a water utility is required to meet a certain spec. Let's say a wastewater treatment plant has to meet a certain specifications of the regulator. That treatment plant or the utility doesn't have to clean up the river. We de-risk utilities from actually the job that they need to do, which is cleaning up the river or the lake or what have you. So by artificially de-risking the utility, by not giving that as their mandate, we then change the financial economics of that. If we were to include the risk associated with the actual cleanup, if I build a seawall, and if that seawall is protective, and that increases and doesn't cause floods anymore, that's going to increase property values. By artificially de-risking, we are not able to bring money, outside money into water, because money is cheap, and we can't get investors in water because investors expect a higher return on investment, but we don't allow for the higher return on investment to occur because we have artificially de-risked water. And so we need to actually link how a water body and who's actually in charge with perhaps doing good, and link them a little bit more together. Then I think of a regulator as an agent. And no different than an agent, and that agent has artificially de-risked things.
So it's not the true cost.
What's that?
It's not the true cost.
It's not the true cost.
I have another way of saying the same thing, which is let's get rid of all the subsidies. There's so much subsidy around water, whether it's all the way from muni bonds to all the different grants and things that are provided, which is the same thing. It's that no one really has to think about the value of what they're getting.
Yeah, the work I do in low and middle income countries today, the infrastructure has to be so small and easy to operate and maintain because people do pay the true cost. There are no subsidies.
Yeah, right.
So, any other last thoughts or comments before we move into polling from the panel?
Can I throw out?
Yep,
Can I give you 3 quick ones?
sure, go for it.
All right, so I'm torn. I'm from New York. I live in Denver. I think Western water law is absolutely nuts. So, yeah, would love to see that change. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. The second is certainly valuing water. Not full cost, but real value. So value of water to economic development, business growth, ecosystem health, and so on. And the third, I almost forgot, we have a ton of regulations in this country, but no national water policy. We don't view water as a strategic resource for this country. And if you look at places like Singapore and Israel, they absolutely get it. And that drives innovation, it drives smart public policy, and it drives sustainability and resiliency.
And they protect all water. Yeah.
One water.
One water.
Yes.
Yep.
I think those are really good suggestions from my co-panelists. I would just add a thought, and it's really around the customer. It's examine how the customers are interacting with everything else that they do, and then wonder, why don't they have a digital relationship with their utility? Why is that not, maybe even a required regulation that we put in place to allow for those preferences to be put in place? Why is it that the rule is you must place a door hanger when the customer actually prefers to have a text? And in that moment, you're making the customer unhappy, and you're costing the utility in excess of money that could be spent elsewhere. And I think that we're never going to be at a situation in the near future where we need less money for infrastructure. It's always going to be aging. It's always going to be, we need more and more, and we're always going to be pressured for costs. But there's got to be a lot of rules out there that are no longer necessary. So let's examine those and figure out what it is that we can get rid of and how we can better use technology to better serve our customers, and reduce costs at the same time.
Great, excellent closure there for that.
Very good.
All right, so can we go to Slido? So we'll do our polling, and then we'll open up for the Q&A. So the first one is, this is going to become a word cloud. So, wide open question, what does smart water mean to you?
We should have brought our phones up here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
Yeah, you can do it.
we can.
We can talk about it.
Resiliency is a great word.
Oh, you're prompting.
Oh.
Efficient is really.
Efficient is big there. So the bigger the word, the more people put it on there. So lots of people put in efficient. And I'm not sure what the colors mean.
So I think clean is next and data is third. it
Third,
looks
yeah.
like.
We need clean data. They can vote as often as they want, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
accessible. Yep, more clean.
Efficient and clean, on demand for all. Efficiency.
More accessible.
accessible.
Ooh.
On water. Was that you?
No. I did connected.
Connected, okay. All right, any comments from the panel on these?
I think it's interesting. I've spent a lot of time thinking about efficient. Oh, look, we just went to accessible. We largely invest in efficient because we think that's one of the key things that the industry needs if we're going to spend all this money on infrastructure. But what I find, and I'm interested to what you see from your clients, I'm not sure that most clients are as concerned about efficient as they are about basically not getting thrown out of office or having customers up in arms or causing a health crisis.
Oh, risk, yeah.
It doesn't feel like efficiency is as high a priority among many clients as one might think. You were one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about accessible, and I go back to my opening remarks, and I think this is what you do as your day job today, Eleanor. I absolutely believe that to get water accessible to the billions, it needs to be smart water. How do we connect the dots between connecting, getting to the billions and smart water? That's our project or our service today.
All right, can we move to the next one? Oh, yeah, skill gaps. This was one we talked
Oh,
about at
people.
breakfast. Yeah,
Oh my God.
we need to bring people into this. So as we've heard on the other panels, the skills are changing. I think it was Jeff's intro remarks from the World Economic Forum. Lots of jobs go away, and lots of different jobs are being created. So what are the things that we're going to need in water?
Just quickly, one of the things that we say at IBM is that 100% of jobs are going to change. And if we as leaders think that doesn't include us, we're wrong, because this is going to change the world and how we work. And it can be a scary conversation, but it's also one where you think of technology as being able to take over these tedious tasks and elevate humans up to be able to do the more effective and the more challenging tasks. And just a quick example, at IBM, we're keeping a tally. So we've used machine learning and AI in our HR department, and we've saved $300 million so far. And 30% of jobs have been eliminated. But some of those jobs that are left are being paid more. And they're being paid more because the job that they're doing and the skills that they're contributing are so much richer.
That's wrong. Grit is on here. Grit handlers.
It's good.
I can talk about operators a little bit. Every small town has an operator. So the question I have is, are they going to be there or are they not going to be there? Because that's a reality. We know for sure, at least in the U.S. Water wastewater model, that every town has got its water and wastewater utility and its operators, and that's so important to the dichotomy of the United States, where jobs are leaving the rural areas and going to urban centers. So what do we actually do about it, and where is all of that going?
I was, of course, at a conference a few weeks ago, and same one you were at, and someone was talking about AI, which jobs will be replaced by AI. And the person I was talking to was not on a panel. He said, think about it this way, any job that requires EQ is for humans, and AI can do just about anything else. And I thought that was really, I'm not sure that I agree with it 100%, but I thought it was really interesting that for all the non-AI jobs, maybe really what the skill is, that human interaction piece, that, emotional quotient, the ability to have a conversation and engage with people.
People skills is on here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Social skills, people skills.
I've had a lot of my clients share that they feel like there's a big gap in this middle, next level management, and who's going to come back in and start doing some of these technical skills that aren't necessarily, the leaders of the company, but are coming next, and perhaps don't require a college degree. And so how do we bring students who may be inspired actually to work in water because of sustainability, because of resiliency issues, directly from high school, and bring them into water and enable them to do some of these technical, and maybe we're over-scoping some of the job racks that we put out. Maybe you don't need a college education to do some of these things that will still be important in the future, because we can use technology and augment our teams with the technology to be successful.
All right, what's the next one? Acceleration. So how can we move? We have a slow sector in water. How can we move it along faster?
That's a good one.
And what you were just saying is part of the workforce growth. Don't have to have degrees, skills. Different skills.
Get them going.
Change of policies.
Yeah.
More conferences.
More conferences, yay.
Yeah, we're on board.
Yeah, be more risk-taking.
Different conferences. I really like the revolution idea, that mixing of, and we talked about it earlier, the mixing of perspectives, I think, and some people say change happens from the outside in, not from the inside out, getting the additional perspectives to go, wow, we could do that.
I had a CIO say to me recently, wouldn't it be cool if we had a conference where we had the technical people and the operators in the same
And
room?
they actually talk to each other.
That's a start, but indeed.
Yeah, talking to each other.
Another interesting story is we did a study where we were trying to improve safety in the workforce, and we brought in utility workers along with oil and gas, workers from the oil and gas industry, and also inline skaters. And what was really interesting is we did a design thinking session, and the ideas that were given to each of the groups were most innovative when they came across sectors.
What was the third one?
Inline skaters.
That's what I thought you said. It wasn't
Who would've
computing.
thought, right?
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're almost out of time.
Policy change.
Okay, this is pick one. Biggest water challenge here in the Pacific Northwest.
The biggest water challenge in the Pacific Northwest is the sun doesn't shine.
The sun doesn't shine, yeah.
Getting dizzy.
I know.
Pretty interesting, actually.
That can be solved.
How are you going to change that infrastructure? How are you going to make it?
Well, being nearsighted,
All solvable.
well, except the fourth. maybe.
Except, well, better
So
hurry up.
it almost seems like our previous question and this question are linked. If we have a longer range policy approach, then and then implementation of policies can be developed that are not too nearsighted. So how do we actually link good policy to long-term thinking? And I think that goes to what I think your daughter and your
Yeah.
son are talking about is how do we get out of that nearsightedness?
Yeah, forget about us, they're saying. All right, Jeff standing up. I think we got one more. One more instant poll. People. We want more people in the sector. A lot of people we have a large retirement.
Wow.
Love that.
That we have in spades.
Yeah. There you have to get the word out.
I like these 4 categories.
It's good.
Will there be a report out on this?
I don't know, will there be a report out on this, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay.
Clearly purpose.
Clearly
Yeah,
purpose, yes.
really.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
All right, well, we are out of time for the water panel. I know we didn't have your Q&A, but we'll be around, except for Rebecca's got to run. But I think the rest of you will be around for a little bit on the breaks.
Yeah.
People have other questions for the panel? Thank you so much.
Awesome. I personally found the entire day so far really fascinating, but the 53% or 53% of the people saying that purpose is really what's going to draw people in was really heartening to me. So it's up to us to generate the interest in that purpose, right? Let's take a break, 15 minutes, and then we'll